of the 6 weeks variety pack bucket course. We are happy to have this course presented, and what we're interested in is whether or not you like the idea of having a variety pack. And we've given you some pink sheets on your tables and chairs, and if you would fill those out, it would be very helpful to us. The bucket course is about you, and we want to do what you like to have. And so if you enjoy having this series of lectures every once in a while, it wouldn't be on a full-time basis, but once in a while we would be happy to provide that for you. This morning we have Dr. J.R. Paulson, who is a physician at Family Care, Grinnell Family Care. And you all know that Dr. Paulson is a master of many trades. And you always wonder when he's going to speak which of his many topics and interests he is going to talk about. So when we invited him to talk this morning, we suggested that he come up with whatever he wanted to talk about. And he came back with the Song of Confucius in the context of Chinese history. Who knew? But I think we're going to learn something this morning, and I can't wait to hear what Dr. Paulson has to say. So please welcome Dr. J.R. Paulson.
Thank you all. Can you hear in the back? Is that okay? Great. It's a pleasure to be here. I needed 2 props for this talk. One of them I'm wearing, thanks to Harold Kasimov, which is a Confucian t-shirt from his birthplace and burial place in Hufu, China. So this is going to help me give a better talk through osmosis. That's the first. If you came to my true talk, you know that that's not true, but I feel it is, so I'll be better. It's going to be divided into 2 halves. The first half, before the break, I'm going to talk about Confucius. And the reason is, most of us Westerners don't know much about Eastern philosophy, philosophers, or Confucius. We've all heard a few Confucian sayings, but who was this guy? What did he do? When I was working on this paper, my wife Linda called me down at the coffee shop, and I don't know whether it was the ring of my cell phone, but a little light went on in my head, and I realized I'm a Confucian. I mean, it just, when you get done, we'll see if you're a closet Confucian too. But, so the first part, we're going to talk about Confucius. The second part is a lot of philosophers, a lot of people will have ideas, but their ideas don't get put into practice. So what would happen if his ideas that we're going to talk about in the first part are actually absorbed by a society and followed to a large degree? What does the structure of that society and government look like? The second thing I needed for a prop was hoping that our government would be in kind of a crappy position right now. So that I could contrast Song China and the United States, politics, government, and society now. And boy, did that come to fruition. Now this is really teed up. I guess the third sub-theme would be take off on Burrell's talk a couple weeks ago on the scientific revolution. And that, of course, is in Britain and Europe, and what are the things that were going on. We learn about in the 1650s, scientists getting together and doing things. But most of us are ignorant about inventions and things that happened a long time earlier in different places that we Westerners think, oh, this happened in the West. So we're blinded to the truth talk I gave about our prejudice from Judeo-Western tradition looking at everything. So I'm going Oriental historic tradition today. So that's my introduction. So, Song of Confucius. I'd like to wander around a little bit. So, he was born 551. His real name was Kung Chu or Kung Fu Chu, which means the great master. So, how do you get Confucius out of that? Well, the Latin of that is Confucius. He was without doubt the most influential and respected philosopher in Chinese history. And from the hundreds BC to the 1900s, his ideas served as the single strongest influence on Chinese society. Confucianism is the philosophy based on his ideas and teachings. And he was like other famous people that were born, myths surrounding his birth. An apparition came to his mother, who was a young woman, that she would have this illegitimate child, which he was. And she went in a cave where she gave birth, supposedly, and there were dragons around and perfumed ladies, and we have to have a myth around the birth. We don't really believe that happened, but that's some of the mythology around it. His early life, he was born in the province of Lu, and I just talked a little bit about its birth. Family in early years. His father died when he was only 3. His father was 70, married a younger woman. He tended herds, he was a shepherder, and he really loved learning. He had this just flair for learning. And he was also very interested in tradition and old rite. So as a young kid, he was just interested in these things. He was very good and loved music and archery. He married at age 19. He had a couple of children at that time. He was then made in the little town superintendent of herds and parks. First job. He also did a little early teaching at that time. But he said, I'm too busy learning and I don't have time for my family, so he divorced at age 23. His wife was left to raise his other 2 kids. Also that year his mother died, which was pretty profound because he really had a strong attachment to her. And he spent the next 3 years mourning her, which was tradition at that time. Another thing that happened at that time was he had to do the funeral service. And so he made up the funeral service for his mother, and he went back in the things that he'd read about these ancient rituals of funerals, and he dug those out and he did this most elaborate and heartfelt and moving ceremony that everyone else in the town just said, unbelievable, that the tribute you gave to your mother. Where did you get that? Oh, that was been done for thousands of years, and I just did it again. And people in his town started then saying, hey, this is the way we should pay respect to our loved ones when they go. So right then and there, he started a tradition looking back of how we treat and revere our departed relatives. Now this is many pictures of him. And you can see we're in China where Lu was the province. And here is his birthplace, not too far from Beijing. His middle years, at 32, he took a job teaching government minister's son. And that was, of course, got him into politics. And a year later, he went to the capital in Luoyang to study. There he visited the famous other philosopher of Taoism, Lao Tzu. At age 34, he accompanied the Prince of Lu to another province as his advisor. There was starting to be war in this part, and so the prince said, we got to get out of here, but hey, you're a pretty smart guy. Why don't you come with me and be my advisor? But after a couple of years, he left the prince. He was kind of disillusioned with politics because all his ideas that he wanted, they didn't necessarily follow. So he says, I'm out of here. So he went out and roamed and studied and had disciples and just all over China for about 13 years. That's a picture of Confucius with some of his disciples. Later life, at 51, he was called back by the Duke of Lu to work in the city because there was peace now, and began his political life. First as a magistrate, then superintendent of public works, minister of justice, and finally prime minister of the province. So he kind of moved up. Disillusionment with the prince finally led to his leaving public service at 56. It's a neat story. Here's this prince, the state's doing really well, and the other prince in the state next to him says, wow, this guy's getting too powerful. I got to do something to distract this guy. So he sends 80 beautiful women to the Duke of Lu and 100 beautiful horses. That's all he does. So the Duke is just spending all his time with the women and the horses and letting the state go to heck. And Confucius is very frustrated by this, and that's literally what caused him to be disillusioned and leave. Next 13 years, he wandered throughout the country, teaching to his disciples, anyone who wanted to learn. Retirement. with peace now, he was able to come back, spend his last 5 years teaching, but he said, I'm not going to do any more government, I'm tired of that. Continued to study, especially the I Ching. He died at 72 as his body failed. However, he remained lucid and philosophical until the very end. One morning, Confucius felt the approach of death. He walked around the courtyard humming, because he was a musician. The great mountain must collapse, the mighty beam must break, and the wise man wither like a plant. He lay down, and 8 days later he died. So that's basically, nutshell, the life of Confucius. His works then are mainly these things called the 9 classics. They're made up of the 5 Qing, which are books that were commented on, compiled, or edited by Confucius, and the Shu, which are books either written directly by him or by his disciples. So the 5 Qing classics of poetry, he collected songs, 100 songs, hundreds of poems of the Chinese tradition, and edited them. Book of Documents, he went back to the Zhao dynasty and recorded the history of that dynasty and the things that were going on. Book of Rites, ceremonies, things you should do in government and all the decorum. The I Ching, Book of Changes, a little more theological. And Spring and Autumn Annuals was his own writing of Lu, the state of Lu and the history of that for 400 years. The 4 Shu are also Great Learning, which we'll get into, Doctrine of the Mean, and the Analectics. Analects are books that were sayings that's right from the master's mouth, things that he's saying and he's teaching, or his pupils are sitting there and some of their dialogue with him. So that's kind of a classic. I ordered it online a couple weeks ago, but it hasn't come yet. But I've not read that, but I want to. And Mencius was a person who lived later who did Confucius, added some things to them, and he's considered one of the other works. So the Analects are one of the bases. So what does basic Confucianism say? Confucius was appalled by what appeared to be the fracturing of Chinese society. He believed that the only cure was to stress a sense of social order and mutual respect, a philosophy that later became known as Confucianism. What's it not? It's not a religion, and it's not a system of philosophy or coherent structure of logic, ethics, politics, or metaphysics in the traditional sense. So you pick up other traditional philosophers, and they got systems and all this, but no, not his. It's a way of thinking, and more importantly, acting, that is not based upon a set of rules or dogmas. So there is no code or anything that you're going to pick up, or any book that's particularly going to say, oh, this is the rules. It's not derived from theological revelation. Somebody didn't come down from a mountain, or nobody told me in a vision what was right and wrong and all this stuff. So that's all the stuff that it's not. It's a circular system, which I hope to explain a little bit. It starts with investigating things. He's a very curious fellow. How do we know knowledge? What does that mean? Importance of the will, being sincere, rectifying the mind, cultivating oneself, harmonizing your family or household, then governing the state, and then you get peace throughout the world. Sounds good? How's this going to work? Investigate things. It all starts with how we think. And remember, I've given a couple classes on seeking the truth and believing. I'm a big person in thinking about thinking. So Confucius disparaged true learning about the world or men by means of an aesthetic life of contemplation. You can't go off on a mountaintop and just think and meditate and you're going to get the answer and stuff. Likewise, he did not think that we could find the truth by a tight system of pure logic. Just sitting there and doing logic or math, that's not going to work. He taught the art of reasoning, not through rules or syllogisms, but by the constant play of a keen mind upon ideas and opinions. So constantly looking at opinions and analyzing them. To study and not think is a waste. To think and not study is dangerous. That kind of summarizes his idea about thinking. Awareness of limits. Confucius never thought himself in possession of complete knowledge, and more importantly, never thought such knowledge is possible. When people come to him, what is true? What is true? And he says, there is no absolute truth. Well, I don't have it. To represent what you know as knowledge, and what you don't know as ignorance, that is knowledge. How many of us slide off that from occasion, time to time? Confucius avoided metaphysical discussions, which must have frustrated his followers to no end. He was always being asked questions on the mysteries of death, heaven, spirits, and prayer. However, Confucius did share in the traditional religious concepts of spirit, ancestor worship, not in the spirit sense, but more giving homage and sacrifice, not people or animal sacrifice, but incense and praying and things like this. Men often inquired into these questions, led by, Confucius said, false motives. People asking these questions about justice, life, death. He said, maybe it's just curiosity. Maybe it's a desire to circumvent present necessities. Or to evade the road of life. Or to seek justice in a future realm. Well, it ain't too good here, but maybe it'll be better at the next stop. He says, think of the motives when people are asked these things. When asked about the cult of spirits, he replied, if you can't serve men, how shall you serve spirits? Chopped him off at the knees with that question. When asked about prayer, he said, his whole life is a prayer. You live your life as the prayer, not asking for something from somebody or something. When asked about death, he said, if you don't know life, how should you know death? The man must perfect his character. So it isn't just be thoughtful. Sincerity is the essence of a good man. The ideal man should be a union of a philosopher and a sage. This is embodied by the triad of intelligence, courage, and goodwill. And if you're lacking in any one of those three, according to Confucius, you ain't a good man. You need all of those. So knowledge isn't enough just to be courage or stupid about something, which I could think of that today. Well, anyways, going on. Or just to have goodwill. You see how you need them all together. Otherwise, you shouldn't put it. The key to an orderly and just world starts with the individual and his own mind. So what's this man like? A higher man. He acts before he speaks. And afterwards he speaks according to his actions. What the higher man seeks in himself is what the lower man seeks in others. The higher man is modest in speech. He seldom speaks. But when he does, he's sure to hit the point. What about Confucius and morals? What was some of his ethics did he teach? What you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. And you go, I've heard that before. Gee, that's the golden rule. Except 4 centuries before Hillel, the famous Jewish teacher and master, and 5 centuries before Christ, he stated that. So, When asked by one of his pupils, Chung Hung, what was perfect virtue, he stated the above. But he says, give me a one-word answer. How should I live my life? What's a one word? Confucius thought and said, reciprocity. Sums it up in one word, reciprocity. The golden rule. Pretty profound. Nevertheless, he did not wish, like Lao Tzu or Christ, to return good for evil. So someone does bad stuff, or do you just, I love him and kiss him and go? No. Confucius said, no. What do you say concerning the principle that injury should be recompensed with kindness? He replied, more sharply than was his custom, with what then will you recompense kindness? So he said, recompense injury with justice and recompense kindness with kindness. So, also, just, food for thought. So in a relationship, Let me read this because it's in a nutshell. Let men seek impartial knowledge, not already slandered or like a truth lecture, and their thinking will become sincere. Let their thoughts be sincere, and their hearts will be cleansed of disorderly desires. Let their hearts be so cleansed, and their own selves will be regulated. They'll control themselves. Let their own selves be regulated, and their families will automatically be regulated. Not by virtuous sermonizing or passionate punishment, but by the silent power of example itself. Let the family be so regulated with knowledge, sincerity, and example, and it will give forth such spontaneous social order that government will once more be a feasible thing. Let the state maintain internal justice and tranquility, and all the world will be peaceful and happy. So you see how these things go. So back to the circle. And it starts with his philosophy, investigating things, sincere. What about his politics? Then, society rests upon laws and customs. It rests upon the obedience of children to their parents and of the wife to her husband. We'll come back to that later. I'm sure some of you picked up on that. When these go, chaos comes. Only one thing is higher than this law of obedience, and that is the moral law. And here's what people that don't know Confucius, well, just be obedient. Just do whatever your husband says, or whatever your father says, filial loyalty, whatever the master, whatever the emperor says. He says, no. In serving a parent, a son may remonstrate with them, but gently. When he sees that they do not incline to follow his advice, he shows an increasing degree of reverence, but does not abandon his purpose. When the command is wrong, a son should resist his father, and a minister should resist his august master. See the morality in there? Morals are higher than authority obligation. That's the one thing that trumps everything else. So if your father tells you to do something, or your military leader says, go kill these people, no. Your moral trumps that.
But you do this even though it may cost you your life?
Yes. The question was, you may do this even if it costs you your life, and he said yes. There is no higher. That's what a book that I can recommend highly, co-authored by Andrew Shea. Anyone read this? All right. It's pretty neat. It's The Lose of Shanghai. It just came out. It's a story of a family in Shanghai. He's a big business mogul family. Had 12 children. And it follows them from about 1920s up to 1960s. And it's all done on the letters that each one of these children wrote to their parents and vice versa. So it's about the girls getting married. There were 9 boys and 3 girls, but it's just wonderful. If you want to have a neat read and understand more on Confucius and the family and all these things that we talked about, respect, and your father tells you something, but you don't agree with him, all that subtlety of how you disagree with dad, but still have the reverence and the respect. It's really neat. The people are the actual and proper source of political sovereignty. For any government that does not retain their confidence, sooner or later falls. When asked by Si Kong about the government, the master said, the requisites for government are 3. There be sufficient food, sufficient military equipment, have a good army, and the confidence of the people. But ask if one of these must be dispensed, which should go first? And he said the military. But it's interesting, asked next, well, what would go next? He said, part with the food. For if the people have no faith, the state has no standing. 2 principles of government. 1, set a good example is the first instrument of government. The rulers or legislators must be an eminence of model behavior, from which, by prestige imitation, right conduct will pour down on his people. Confucius said. I put in Pope Francis there. Because to me, I think the change in the Pope, wait a minute, all of a sudden this guy is doing different stuff that's been done previously. He's walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And see, he's doing my model. So I think he's going to have tremendous change on the Catholic Church, personally, by doing, basically, he doesn't know, but he's following Confucian principles. And it's going to cause a tremendous, I think, there. Secondly, good appointments. Employ the upright and put aside the crooked. In this way, the crooked can be made to be upright. Elect men of talents, virtue, and ability. It's like the Tea Party. Other advice for government. Avoid foreign relations as much as possible and seek to make the state so independent of outside supplies that it would never be tempted to war for them. Seek a wide distribution of wealth. For the centralization of wealth is a way to scatter the people. And letting it scatter among them is a way to collect the people.
That's amazing.
Seeing any of that now?
Middle class.
Decrease punishments and imprisonments. Population in jail. Increase public instruction, education. For there being instruction, there will be no distinction of classes. And as we'll see later in the second half, how you can equilibrate classes by giving them the opportunity of education. Good manners must be a care of the government too, for when manners decay, nations decay with them. A competent provision should be secured for the aged until their death. Employment for middle age must be guaranteed. The means of growing up for the young should be assured. Widowers, widows, orphans, and childless men, and those who are disabled by disease should be sufficiently maintained. Novel concept. Good government is only possible in a sound social condition, molded by the Li, or what we just talked about, right music, which I have no problem with, and the right modes of human intercourse. If humanity reigns in the house of the serious man, humanity will flower in the whole state. So in our society, when we don't have, when the families are breaking up and there's not this, he would say that's one of the reasons you're going to expect your society and then your state to go down to. Question?
First one, the competent provision should be secured for the aged till their death. By whom?
The question is, number one, competent provision should be secured for the aged until their death.
Is it by the family?
We're going to, in the second part, we'll show how it really happens. But by the family, but if they can't, the state should come in and do it. So if your family can do it, fine, but if not, nobody should go without that. So if you're a single male and you don't have a family, we're going to do it for you. So ideally, the family. In a country well governed, poverty is something to be ashamed of. Remember that one. In a country badly governed, wealth is something to be ashamed of. He acknowledged class warfare, but how do you, but the statement is right on. Confucius knows that there are few men capable of this, self-mastery, who have learned to do what is good and know what they are doing. But the people, on the other hand, can be led to follow something. They don't necessarily have to be led to understand it. The man capable of governing is and should be independent of public opinion.
Oh, yeah. Wow, fat chance.
Whoa.
Oh.
See how this translates in the second half. He should act and be seen as a role model for others. He governs less by laws and decrees, but more by example and virtue. A political and superior man tolerates no imprecision in his speech.
Question. Question.
Yes.
Who determines all of this? What body of people within the society?
Question is, who determines all this? What is this? I think that'll be more clear when I get into how this is applied. Because, right, this is his philosophy. And I'm going to, yeah. Confucius gave, so you got this turmoil times. It could be right now. It could be any time. And they said, what do you do? What's the first thing you do? Whatever this is happening is all messed up. These people are fighting with these people and we can't get anything done. So Confucius said, words must be set straight. What inheres in words should be brought out. but language is misused. Words are employed for meanings that do not befit them. A separation arises between being and language. He who has inner being also has the words. He who has the words does not always have the inner being. Think of the things you've seen on TV or other people have said that, If language is in disorder, everything goes wrong. If words, designation, concepts are not right, judgments aren't clear. Works don't prosper, punishments do not strike the right man, and the people do not know where to set hand and foot. Therefore, the superior man chooses words that can be employed without doubt, and forms judgments that can be converted into actions without fear of doubt. The superior man tolerates no imperfections in his speech. Turn on TV later today. So, it's the modern parents, siblings, relatives, works, country, world goal. Social harmony through moral perfection. Oh, this is a time, and this is a degree of civilization, and this is when Confucius, the Duke of Zhao here, during this, things were kind of united, but here things fell apart in different countries, and it's kind of chaos all over in China. And Confucius is saying, and of course he wants, just a second, let me finish this. And so the country of China isn't even united yet. It's all, but it's just confusion around. So Confucius says, if you follow my precepts, we can take society, the degree of civilization, to a much higher level. And this is what's happened. So as goes up, the influence of China, and we're going to concentrate on the Song dynasty and how his influence. And that's what the second part of this is going to be about. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about China today and communists and what they think of him, but for now we'll continue on. When did we learn about Confucius? All this stuff is going on about him. This is the first translation of Confucius. And if you look at it down here, your Roman numerals, 1687. Thank you. 1687. These four Jesuits were over in China. They came back, learned Chinese, and translated Confucius. And they did it for the Sun King, Louis the 14th of France. So he's the one that commissioned him to do that. So that's how we first heard about and learned about Confucius. Confucius sayings, or what I would describe as pithy statements of wisdom. First one, probably as a kid. You know, come on, he's thinking around as a kid. Confucius is to study and not think is a waste. To think and not study is dangerous. Bears repeating, that's why I put it in again. The expectations of life depend upon diligence. The mechanic that would first perfect his work must first sharpen his tools. I love this one. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. Good pedagogical principles in there too, isn't it? And good rules for life. The cautious seldom err. You've all heard this before, probably didn't know where it came from. Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Well, he didn't say we're not going to make mistakes. We get up, we move on. Again, the golden rule and kind of negatives, but there's repeating. And the one that we can all email our representatives. The green reed which bends in the wind is stronger than the mighty oak which breaks in a storm. Confucius saying? If you want a pretty nurse, you got to be patient. Right? Maybe he didn't say that. I don't know. It sounds like something he would have said. If you think in terms of a year, plant a seed. If in terms of 10 years, plant trees. If in terms of 100 years, teach the people.
Question.
Just a second, let me finish these. It's easy to hate and it's difficult to love. All good things are difficult to achieve and bad things are very easy to get. This is how the whole scheme of things works. I think that's pretty pithy philosophy to try to remember. Some of the easy stuff. Loving sometimes stuff. Hating people, that's easy. Everything has beauty. Everything. But not everyone sees it. A couple more sayings. I'm not going to go all through these because they're difficult to read. The bottom one, the superior person thinks of virtue. The small person thinks of comfort. Second from the bottom, put yourself in order, then be sure you act justly and sincerely toward others. Then you will find happiness. A wise person is one who knows and understands others. A good person is one who loves others. So he puts love as above. And this could be for this class and continuing on. This is the way he taught. Every truth has 4 corners. As a teacher, I give you 1 corner. And it's for you to find the other 3. I like that. So I'm not going to tell you stuff. I'll give you a corner. You figure out the rest. And the motto for, I think you should chisel in George's library here, or who's ever the direct library, put this in here, because that's what I see this whole bucket thing is. Never be tired of learning or teaching others. Good thing to have for both, so. Okay, now, what I'd like to do is have a break, and then we come back. What I want to do is talk about Confucius was 500 BC. His principles were put into pretty much effect about 1,500 years later. They were in between, but it reached a zenith at around 1000 AD. So when you come back from lunch, or our snack, we don't have to go to lunch, but what we have, we're going to talk about what it will be like at that time. How is Chinese society doing, and what are they coming up with? But your homework for the break is, I want you to think about what 3 discoveries and or inventions have most helped civilization. I'm going to ask for it after the break. What inventions or discoveries, and I don't mean fire, let's not do that because that's Paleolithic times, but what invention has most affected civilization? What 3? So you can think about that. So with that, we will adjourn until after break. Thank you.
Can't hear you.
We'll move into the second half of Dr. J.R. Paulson's course on the Song of Confucius in the context of Chinese history. J.R.
Thank you. Woo. Is that okay? In the back?
Different system.
Okay, let's take about 1 minute and throw out, you don't have to raise your hand, what inventions do you think have been key in human history?
Printing press.
Agriculture. Paper. Printing press.
Wheel.
Wheel.
The wheel. Antibiotics.
Gunpowder.
Writing? Writing.
Language.
Language.
A lot.
A lot.
Gunpowder. Gunpowder?
Penicillin. Earl, how about some science here? Okay, well, thank you. So file those away and we'll move on. We'll see if any of yours are in my second part, which it might be. With all the trouble we're having with our dysfunctional government, economic uncertainty, and social unrest, I wonder what we've learned from history, if anything. I therefore thought it might be both interesting and instructive to see what country or civilization, if any, was ahead of the curve. I was specifically wondering how much we've progressed in the last 1,000 years in political, social, and economic realm. So for perspective, I Googled world history and looked at the period of 1,000 to 1,100, just to see what was going on. Those of you that know your history, Western history, know that that was referred to as the Middle Ages in Europe, and also the Dark Ages. Dark Ages were between 500 AD at the sack of Rome, and then goes all the way until the 1500s with the Renaissance and the Reformation and the resurgence of Western civilization. So Western civilization wasn't doing too well at this time. Over in North America, for perspective, the Anasazi culture were building the cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde. Vikings, Leif Erikson just discovered North America, and Beowulf was just written. In 1009, the Muslims destroyed the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Macbeth murders Duncan, the King of Scotland. 1054, the separation of the Eastern Orthodox and Western Roman Catholic Church. Norman the Conqueror invades invades England and becomes William the Conqueror. And in 1095, the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II calls for a holy war to wrest control of Jerusalem from the Muslims, starting the first of 8 crusades. In Europe, feudalism was the economic system, as kings fought with the Roman Catholic Church for the control of the land, the states, and men's minds. What was happening on the other side of the world? Specifically, the Song Dynasty, which occurred about 1,000 years ago. So your handout has the dynasties of China that we don't expect you to memorize, but it's kind of neat. They got a pretty good history going all the way back here. So the Song Dynasty is right in here, about 1,000. You see a northern Song and a southern Song Dynasty. The Song Dynasty rose after the Tang Empire fell in 906. The empire before the Tang was, as I said, it was a whole bunch of different states. But it was considered to have begun in 960 and extended to 1276. It's one of the greatest epics in human history, but unknown to most Westerners until now.
Question?
And here's a map of China at that time. And here's the line. This was the northern Song, but that eventually fell to the Jin, and so it's the southern Song, this area that we're going to talk about. And basically south of the Yangtze River. Now, how do we know about this? Period. 3 ways. One, they had left us a printed record. Well, that's kind of neat. So there's written recordings of what was going on then. The emperor over the period, the first emperor was Emperor Taizu. We know second thing about this period from Marco Polo, because he and his father left Venice in 1269, traveled to Cathay, which is what they call that time China, and returned many years later. And if you read Marco Polo, which is fascinating, he tells what it was like. So here's the first, a Westerner goes there and says, wow, this is what I'm really seeing. People didn't believe him, they called him Marco Millions, but he really did record the history of that. The third glimpse is through art. And this is a magnificent picture scroll by the Chinese artist Zhang Zudin during the Song Dynasty. And this is a picture of along the river. It says it's entitled Along the River during the Kunming Festival. So they had this festival, the Festival of the Dead, where people all get out and they honor the dead, and they go downtown and all along the river, and it's just a big festival day. And this artist copied that, and it's 17 feet long. And I went over to Chung Garden after break here, and I went over there and I went, holy cow, that's a Qingming scroll. And I'm sitting there drooling over, and I go, that's a Rainbow Bridge. So go there, eat some Chinese food, and look at the mural. And it's about the time period that we're talking about.
We're wondering about it.
So that's what that is. Picture of the life, what's going on, very well captured of what was happening. The famous Rainbow Bridge, pretty impressive structure at that time, allowing the boats with the masts to go under. Okay, economic revolution. China's population was about 50 million in 743, but by 1100 it was 100 million. 100 million people. China then. It was the largest country in the world. Many Westerners have a preconceived conception that China was tightly controlled by an emperor who ruled over a large population of subsistence farmers. The people drank tea, ate rice, and lived primarily in the country. In fact, China passed through a phase of economic growth that was not only unprecedented in Chinese history, but also in world history. It's a remarkable advance at that time in urbanization, industrialization, commercialization, and relative peace. So the farmers at this time did not just aim at subsistence, but they wanted to try to grow more crops. And to get their crops, transportation was important. And you see all the rivers going in China, they're all going from east to west. And how do you move stuff from north to south? Well, the Chinese already had started and built the Grand Canal. This is over 1,000 miles long, and you can see where it goes, all the way from Beijing, all the way down past Shanghai to Hangzhou, which was the capital of the Sun at that time. Pretty impressive. Just to do that. And it's still functional today. But they invented, and some of you might want to make notes on your thing, because I'm going to go through things that were invented by the Chinese or discovered. Well, compound lock system. They invented to be able to go on different levels of water.
One system?
Heavy industry flourished during this time, owned by both the government and private firms. It wasn't just private firms or just the government, by both. And as you can see, they started smelling way back in 1050 BC. So Chinese, iron and steel. Burrow would be interested to know, and so would some of you other folks, on that they found some bolts from these crossbows 500 BC. And they dug them up and they found that these bolts were not rusted at all because they were plated with chromium.
Wow.
So they invented chromium plating 500 years before the Common Era. They had large smelting works, blast furnaces at this time.
What was the date on
They at first started using coal for these blast furnaces. So what does that do eventually to the environment? You gotta cut all the trees down to get charcoal. And things were not going well. So they realized, we got a problem, cutting all these trees down. Let's use coal, which they discovered, which Marco Polo didn't even know what this coal was. He said they burn this black stuff, and it goes on all night, and it's just amazing. So the Chinese changed over to coal and coke for their blast furnaces. In English, what do we call the word that describes this? China. Well, China, gee, where was that invented? China. Trick question. There were major ceramics at this time. Porcelain. You think, well, that's China. No, it's different. It's a much higher temperature. You have to have very hot kilns to do porcelain. But it was first produced in the Tang Dynasty and later perfected in the Ming, but the Europeans didn't invent it until 1708. common people usually wore hemp in what's rammy, I have no clue what that is, and by the end of this period, they wore cotton. However, the most highly prized fabric at home and of course for export was what? Silk. And so silk, of course, comes from all these silkworms. So thousands of years before they realized you can't get all these worms, get all the cocoons, and you can make the threads and you can get a pattern out of that. So Mari, trick question, who invented the spinning wheel? Chinese. Chinese invented the spinning wheel to make the silk. So anytime you're on a spinning wheel, you can think, yeah, owe that to the Chinese. Now, they say, okay, this is kind of a slow process, one person at a time. They kind of hopped ahead in the Industrial Revolution and said, let's get some bigger mechanized looms. This is one of 1,800 moving parts. And this could make huge amounts. So they're doing this around at this time with these huge looms. And where does the name Silk Road come from? All the people going across land to go to China to get silk to go back. And they traded other things, of course. So the Silk Road, hence was named. But they also went by sea. So lest you think the Chinese just sat there and waited for everybody to come to them, no, they took their boats and they traveled all over. And that was pretty, at that time, that was major seafaring. Major when you see where they're going. Now, the money at that time was this. It was just metal, and it had holes in it. So if you're taking some money to go buy some, you take your purse and you fill it up with this. Well, if it's something that's expensive, and imagine if you're taking a whole shipload of stuff over to the money. Chinese go, So, we're going to invent paper money. And we're going to make it good through the entire realm. So this piece of paper is as good as whatever. And we'll make sure that the people we trade with also. So they invented paper money in currency. China invention in discoveries. We already said that they're world traders. And so they got to go on their boats. So what things do they do to make boats better? Well, one thing, they make multiple hulls. So they don't have just one hull, they have another hull inside that one. So if they hit a rock, or if they're in war and a missile or hits it, it just knocks the other one, but the boat doesn't sink. Pretty smart. So watertight bulkheads. They invented the movable stern rudder. So you're going up one of them little rivers, and it's getting shallower. You're dragging your rudder on the bottom. Let's make a rudder that goes up and down depending on the height of the river. Pretty smart. They were the first people to use dry docks. So if the boats need to get fixed, let's put them in dry dock. No one had a clue what dry dock was. And they decided they could do that. They perfected the anchor. They invented the movable sail. It sounds so simple. No, the movable sail that you can turn around so you can sail into the wind. People didn't have this before. They invented paddle wheelers to assist the wind.
What were they driven by?
Pardon?
What did they drive the wheel by? What power?
Oh, the question is, what did they drive the paddles by? And nuclear. No, I have no clue. But then the steam engine was invented, so it may have been kind of anyway.
Did
You know?
have scores of oarsmen pulling at oars?
Yes, they also have oarsmen, as you can see here too. But I mean, the fact that they have the paddles is another mechanism. Now, if you're going to have a navy, you're going to need some big boats and navy to protect you. So we think the British think they were the armada of the sea to protect all their shipping. Well, no, they had the first navy in the world and the best navy to protect all the merchants going around the world, so they wouldn't get pirated and other things like this. There's a problem when you go out to sea and it's foggy. What is it?
You don't know
What
where you
direction are you going?
are. Oh, my.
So you'd stay pretty close to whatever, or put your sails down and wait for the stars or the sun. This is called the self-pointing fish. And it was described early in Chinese history in the 900s, but it was made into a more scientific compass, and then finally into a maritime compass that you could carry and was mounted and carry with you on your boat. So now you can navigate.
If I agree, look at all those maps.
I want you to study that boat for a while.
Which one?
The Chinese were the most advanced seafarers in the world at that time. Some of their ships were over 1,000 meters, exceeded 1,500 tons, and could carry thousands of passengers. This is their European boat at that time. This is a Chinese boat at that time.
Oh, my word.
Did any of us? I never saw that picture. I mean, I thought, well, you know, our Western European boats are pretty big. A little scale here. Moving on. Another history-changing invention that you didn't mention is gunpowder.
I did.
Yeah, it was
Good,
mentioned.
okay, hey, somebody gets that. Way to go. Gunpowder was a pretty significant invention.
Gunpowder, yeah.
Whether you like it or not, it was a big invention. Chinese invented gunpowder. This is the first manuscript that talks about, this is the first formula for gunpowder. You can't read it, but somebody can. And of course, we know they use it for fireworks. Yeah, but they also made grenades.
No.
They put these things on arrows and could shoot them. And they use big rockets. Remember when this is occurring now. You know, so you're another army coming in, and all of a sudden you got these rockets coming in at you. Pretty good military advantage. I have no clue that the Chinese have these matchlocks. These are Chinese matchlocks that they invented and used. They invented a multiple firing crossbow, not just a regular one, but this is one that goes choom, 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 choom. So you can load it up with 8 or 9 things and it's just repeating crossbow. You know there was such a thing. They invented the cannon. Major. Because not only could you shoot whatever, but it changed the history in Europe. Because when all these people had all the castles in feudal Europe, the kings could not get rid of the lords, the feudal lords, because they were all hunkered down in their castles. And you had moats and stuff like that. Chinese cannons eventually gets over Europe. The kings go, hey, we use these cannons, so they go up to these, blow these holes in these castles and go in. So all of a sudden, the feudal lords, their history leads to centralization of many of the states in Europe. It started in China. AEDs. Now, Chinese had landmines way back then.
Oh, my.
Multi-stage rockets. Okay, another invention, which I'm sure some of you thought about. Those of us in the West, I learned that who discovered printing? Gutenberg, right? In the 1600s. And this changed civilization because printing, you print the Bible, first thing they printed, right? Gutenberg Bible. But, no, Chinese did this. The first printings were in the 800s of Buddhist texts that they did on wood block printing. And wood blocks is where you put the thing, and the wood block, and put all the ink on it, and you...
Question? When did the Chinese also invent movable type?
Yep, hang on.
When?
Okay, so, you see all these wooden blocks, so you can print stuff. And they also invented movable type during the Song Dynasty. Yes?
Well, some of these Chinese inventions, the Koreans say that were actually invented in Korea, and the Chinese took the invention to China.
The questions, a lot of the, I think she's asking is, some of the Koreans said that the things were invented in in Korea and then later claimed to China, but that's not true. Because we have documentation because they write these things down, and because they had the printing, they could be the first on the block to say that. You see what I'm saying?
The Koreans dispute that.
Well, I mean, maybe, but I mean, I can tell you who the people that at least read that suggested movable type, and Sheng Zhou, the first guy that did this, and the monks that did it. And of course, it would travel through that part of there. So who gets the original patent, I don't know. But they kind of didn't care. Now, what's the problem with movable type? There is a big problem with it. And let's go back. The problem is, how many characters are in the Chinese alphabet?
Yes.
Up to 40,000. So because of 40,000, you can't just sit there with your bins and going around. So block printing was still pretty important. But the bottom line is they used it throughout this period, as we'll see in a little while. By the way, somebody mentioned paper. Invented by the Chinese
Yeah,
during the
some paper.
2nd century. So this is the paper that we talk about using today. Now they have papyrus and vellum and other things, but I mean the process of what we use paper, where you grind that pulp and that they did that. What about agriculture? The problem is that you've got all this population increasing and you've got to feed them. Well, that's the problem. So what did the Chinese do? Hybrid rice. And they went to Vietnam and found strains of rice that would fast grow, drought resistant, so they could get 2 crops a year. 2 crops a year. So now, all of a sudden, you've got all this rice that you can export and sell at markets. Tremendous economic boom. They invented the plow that goes up and down. Remember, they had steel before anybody else, so the steel plow was kind of a logical invention. This is the first treatise on agriculture. So what the government did was print these manuals and send them out to all the farmers and said, this is this kind of rice. If you use this hybrid, you're going to get more crops. Or you have a drought-resistant region. Here, this is a drought-resistant crop. Plant this. This is how you do hydroculture. This is how we think it's best for you to do terrace farming. This is how you should manage your water. This is how you should do this. So the farmer that's out there can get government printed stuff with the best scientific information about farming that's disseminated. Way a step ahead of everybody else. So these manuals are just really important.
But supposedly most of the farmers couldn't read.
No, the question is, can most of the farmers not read? Because what I'm going to come up to, you'll find that more people could read. Because of printing. Printing allowed the layperson, books were very expensive and were a privy of the rich or higher class. When you can print now, you can print textbooks very cheaply. So education-wise, they made all these things available. So it allowed the layperson to go to school. You could get these things, and really had a tremendous effect on that. Other technological advances. How about the clock? Anybody put the clock down as an invention? Mechanical clock. We talked about famous clock in longitude. Harris? Well, first mechanical clock was back at this time. How accurate it was. Su Sung was a polymath at the time, and he built this 40-foot tower clock, water clock. And besides having all the mechanisms, it had an armillary on the top that showed the position of the stars and the planets and everything else.
How accurate was it?
Pretty accurate, because the stars and the planet, if you got the sun coming up at the wrong time and the moon, you find that out pretty quick after a number of days or weeks. So very accurate, not to seconds or whatever. This is the first math textbook of math. This is, somebody recognize that? Pascal's triangle. But Pascal wasn't born yet. He won't come along for quite a few hundred years. So Pascal's triangle was figured out by the Chinese. Who invented the abacus? Chinese. So multiplication, dividing, they get that thing out, and by them, and still used in places today. This is a mechanical odometer. This is the cart that they built that would go around and it would measure in distance how far you're going. But it had a compass on it so you could always point it south. But to do that, you have to have a differential gear because otherwise one wheel's going to turn. They figure out how to do a differential gear. So they can go around and they're doing some serious mapping. And this is a grid map of China. Now when you think when that was, now not only did they do a grid map, they also figured out how to do elevation and did a topographical map, topography. Here's their math and they're figuring out how high stuff is and they're making relief maps. This is the first star chart in astronomy. Medicine was pretty impressive at that time. They formed the government formed, said medical schools there aren't any, and we got to have right medical schools, and everybody, this is the curriculum, and this is what it's going to be. And so we set up state will have medical school, and we'll publish all the books, everybody knows. It took until 1910 for the Flexner report in this country that showed medical education in the United States and Canada was all over the map. And then we ought to have some standards in our medical school. They did that back then. Some of the people at this time decided that when people died, they could do autopsies. And so they did autopsies. They did CSI crime investigation. They documented the possible causes of death. So if you read some of their manuscripts, it's literally CSI protocol back then. This is a seismograph to measure tremors up to 500 miles away in the earth. Architecture. 10-story high pagoda. Still standing, pretty high.
When was it built?
I can't remember offhand. Bridges, they have thousands of bridges over all these rivers high, so the engineering was quite good. So let's flip into government. This is a person studying for the exam. And what they decided was, as Confucius said, greater emphasis should be put upon knowledge. So previously in China and elsewhere in government, appointments were hierarchical. You know, if you're the son of so-and-so or you're appointed by the prince or whatever. No, let's do it by merit. Let's do it by the people who know it, the smartest person. So we'll have exams, civil service exams, and you will come and take these civil service exams. And if you don't pass them, you don't get a spot in government. And I don't care if you're going to be the dog collector in Grinnell or you're going to be state legislator, or you had to pass exams. And of course, they were harder the farther you got up. And when you got up further, you had to take difficult exams, many hours and days. And you had to study the works of Confucius, because that's what you were tested on. And it wasn't just memorization. You had to compose poetry. You had to not just memorize facts, but deal with facts and come out with actual thinking. You could take it over many times. The average person did many times. They're worried about cheating. Oh, I know you. You're so-and-so's son. You know, we're going to give everybody a number. So everybody takes their exam on a number. So you can't cheat. And then, but I recognize his writing. They actually, on some of the higher exams, had scribes copy over the whole exams and give it to the readers so that nobody could tell who it was by their writing. So by the time that the Sung Dynasty, in the first part of it, 30,000 annual candidates. But by the end of it, 40,000 candidates were vying to take these jobs. And only the people who passed would get into government. It's kind of unique because Confucius said only the competent, smart people that also have a little education, because that's what Confucius taught, was a liberal education, would be in there, the highest levels. It protected the emperor because he's got this literati around here, the literati, not a whole bunch of military people. Now, he had military generals and stuff too, but the fact that on all the civil service exams. So, the consequence in society, you could be born any level you wanted to, you had access to take the exams. So whatever class you were in, didn't make any difference. He also said that, as Confucius said, that the people, if you're in public, getting paid for public service, you should not have any outside pay. Should not have any outside pay. In other words, no lobbying. You get your government stipend, and that's it. What else did the government do at this time? The government set up a postal system that went to rural areas. The granaries they built and had surplus during good years. Taxes were remitted to the peasants who suffered from drought, storms, or insect depredations. So if your crops go bad and you got a flood or something, government's crop insurance. The government's going to do that. And they supported Social Security for aging and population, and illness and orphans had to be done by the government if the family could not do that. Okay, so I think you're getting the idea of what things were like at this time. Is extremely, the cities were prosperous, crime was almost non-existent, and so what finally happened to this? Well, it's often said that a great civilization and countries deteriorate from within or invaded from without, or succumb to a combination of both. But the song didn't fall from within, but from without. Genghis Khan came and, they also invented tea, by the way, surprise, which was not really popular until the Sung Dynasty. It became a fad, and they had tea houses like we have coffee houses now. But that was not the... Oh, by the way, they invented alcohol. Now, beer was around a long time, and they had 4% beer, a couple thousand BC, but so did other places in the world. 12% in the song, they got pretty strong wine, but they couldn't get it stronger in Europe until many years later. But wine jars were found 7,000 BC, so you can credit that. Plays, they had in the big theater houses. Of course, we're not even going to go into all of the contributions at that time in art. This is Ming Yang that I have, but this style of nature, of course, is fantastic. Women were not doing very good in the sense that if your husband died, you could not remarry, and you had to take care of all your husband's male relatives for the rest of their life. Also, however, they did get legal rights to have property, and property, pass it on to your children, which was plus. They also had able to read and availability of the language, but didn't really do much in the schools. So the role of women, we talked about a little bit. Even one of them became an empress at one time. Foot binding. You've all heard of this. Also became popular in that time. First among the concubines, but later among the upper classes. That's what a bound foot looks like. That's what an x-ray of a bound foot looks like. So we all do that. I don't know, but maybe there's not a lot of difference in there. So, Genghis Khan conquered the northern Song in 1234. His grandson Kublai Khan became the ruler after his death and later conquered the rest of China in 1279. So on your little dragon there, that's the beginning of the Yan or the Mongol dynasty, which lasted until 1368. But Genghis Khan, or Kublai Khan, was not stupid. He's got this tremendous social thing. He doesn't destroy it, he doesn't take over. He just sits in and takes over and just has them pay tribute to him. And continues to support the aged and hospitals and education and all this. So that was pretty amazing, I think, that he did that. So that's Kublai Khan. And that is the time when Marco Polo came and visited China. And he worked for the Khan. Khan gave him a job. He worked for him for a whole bunch of years. So he really got to know the inside of the empire and the... So, he agreed with Plato that the human condition would not improve until philosophers became kings or kings philosophers. He believed in the Li, which is the unceasing education and perfection of all men. He believed that the aim of all learning is practical efficiency. His view of government was based upon the strength of the family and the moral fabric of society. Men are held in check by custom rather than laws. A man in a country should be judged not by their words, but by their actions. And the superior man does not neglect his neighbors. He calls on all men to cultivate the virtues of industry, modesty, sobriety, gravity, decorum, and thoughtfulness. He counsels us to continue to take part in whatever religious practices we subscribe, but to also adds that we can only live in and improve our present life. He's not worried about what's going to come after. By following his teachings, Kong felt that we could each make this a better world, one person at a time. This is where he's buried, in Khufu, and the temple in Nanjing. I don't know if some of you have been to Nanjing, but they don't have pictures or icons or stuff around. He would want that, and he doesn't have that. There's a movie, by Chow Yun-fat, Confucius, and here's a woman who's that's the main actor that's giving her, she's a Confucian. And you go, well, what's significant about that? Well, it's the longest, Confucius is the longest lineage of any people. He goes, like there's Smiths, and you could follow Smiths back. Well, Kongs go back 83 at least generations. 83, so it's the longest documented known. And there's 3 million people that are probably part of Kong relation. 2 of them that really claim to be that. They brought up whether they're going to do DNA testing of that, which we can do now. But so it's a big deal over in China, particularly at this place, because you could be a relative. So Confucius, his books, his teachings. I'll try to get a printed session for some of you that asked for some of the sayings of Confucius that I'll give to Joanne. But those of you that don't have a dumb phone like me, or have a smartphone, there's a Confucius app. So you can find and learn about Confucius. Concerning power, politics, or military, wisdom is the mightiest enemy. And I love this one, the last slide. Life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. So, I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, JR. There really are no words to thank JR enough for what he does for the bucket courses. But as Flowers on Fourth believes, when words fail, say it with flowers. So thank you, and here's a bucket of thanks for you, JR.
That's a real bucket.
Next week, we'll begin a 4-week course by Jim Arns. I've asked him to say just a little preview about it for next week.
Well, next week, we're going to get into something which I haven't taught this course in 10 years, and I have revised many of my opinions one way or another. But I'm pretty sure that it will be controversial among members of the audience. So you should pay your cookie fee and take your choice on whatever comes out of this. I'm going to divide this into 4 different sections. And I'm pretty much not going to get into all of those in order in exact timeframes, like one per session. It doesn't work that way because like the guy who initially interested me in this business, George Drake, I always get behind. And I'm going to take off dealing with, first I'm going to talk about the purpose of credit references, then geography, world situation in the 1950s, containment, and in some form we'll talk about Vietnamese history and how it was affected by the Chinese growing out of the Confucian era. And they handled the Vietnamese for something like 1,000 years. Then I'm going to get into a counterinsurgency interlude, which was one of the main tactics that was being used during the later years. And then from then I'll get into U.S. involvement with 6 different presidents: Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Jack Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and finally Richard Nixon. And then what little time we have left over, we'll try and assess the impact on what went on in this country as a result of the Vietnam War. We'll see what happens.
Thank you, Jim. Please remember to fill out your pink sheets, and you can just leave them on the table if you would like to, or put them on the table in the hallway. We'll hope to see you all next week. Thanks for coming this morning.